Good morning. It is Tuesday, Chof Gimel Shvat, Tovshin Ayin Tes. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer HaMamorim, Tovshin Yud Gimel. We are in the Mamar of Yud Beis Tammuz Tovshin Yud Gimel, Mamar Daas. We are on page Kuf Tzadik Aleph. Three lines from the end of the first paragraph. The line starts Umedida, we're at the full stop. The Rebbe is explaining that there is the idea of Havayahu Elakim, the the light, and the Kalim, the vessels, the giving energy and the regulating energy are all one. The Rebbe is explaining it at the various levels. He started explaining it first Bashamayim, at the level of Bashamayim, which is the world, the realm of Atzilus, emanation. And in this section, the last section that we're learning now, the Rebbe is addressing that at the level of Bashamayim Mimal, the level above Atzilus, generally a reference to Keser. The Rebbe addressed the point that the levels beyond Atzilus, beyond the realm of emanation, are the source of the lights that eventually become manifest in Atzilus, in the world of emanation. And in their state, as they are in their source, they are not limited. They are bli gvul. They are without form. Right? And the question was, how do the lights of Atzilus suddenly attain a character, a form, which doesn't exist in their source? So the Rebbe explained, it's because of two things. First of all, because it travels through the parasa, this barrier, this curtain, this blackout curtain, so to speak, that exists between beyond Atzilus and Atzilus. And also because that parasa, that barrier, follows the light already having gone through the first symptom, the first contraction, which is in a manner of siluk, total removal. So those two processes cause the light, the Ur of Atzilus, the light that eventually becomes manifest in Atzilus, to be able to attain a character, even the character that is imposed upon it or impressed on it through the Kelim, through the various vessels of in Atzilus, Chochma, Chesed, and so on and so forth. That's where we're up to. 3 lines from the end of the first paragraph, the full stop. Through the fact that there was a contraction in a manner of total removal, it's talking about the first contraction, then this barrier that exists between, the curtain that exists between beyond Atzilus and Atzilus, is able lahalim al ha'ir, to conceal on the light, so that when it becomes manifest and it descends into the realm of Atzilus, of emanation, Yuchal lekabel medida v'hagbola amitis, it could then attain a measure, a true measure and limit, which is what? What's the true measure and limit? Shezui medida v'hagbola d'kelim d'Atzilus, which is the measure and limit of the vessels, the receptacles of Atzilus, that they impose, imprint upon the Ur that clothes itself in the various vessels. So this is Uris and Kelim, lights and vessels, energy and regulators, in beyond Atzilus, in the realms beyond Atzilus. What does it have to do with Havayahu Elakim? How are they all one? Bashamayim Mimal, right? Mamar, concerning this it says, Ke Havayahu Elakim Bashamayim Mimal. That Havaya is Elakim in the heavens above, which means Lamaylam Atzilus. In other words, that the Uris, the lights, and the Kelim, the vessels, are one, even at the level of Bashamayim Mimal, even at the levels that are beyond Atzilus, which are the levels that we just discussed. Hainu, meaning, for although the first contraction was not like the contractions that follow later on in the chain order of creation, because those that follow later on in the chain order of creation, are merely a reduction of the light, or to use Harris's terminology from yesterday, it's a quantitative reduction, right? But rather, it is, the first contraction is in a manner of total removal. The light is completely removed. Right? So when you talk about a miyut ha'ir, a reduction, it's more easy to explain that Havaya Ulakim, that the Eiros and the Kelim are one. As explained, in fact, as the Rebbe explained, concerning the Eiros and the Kelim in Atzilus. That the Keli's purpose is, it already has that aspect of revealing and so on and so forth. Says the Rebbe, this also applies to what? To a tzimtzum, which is in a state, which is complete removal. Mikol makom, gam siluk ha'ir. What is the intention? What's the purpose and the intention of this total removal of the divine energy at the tzimtzum rishon at the first contraction? Is it to conceal? The whole purpose is what? Gam siluk ha'ir kavanasi b'shvil galus. The whole purpose is in order to allow revelation. Why did Hashem make or cause the tzimtzum rishon, the first contraction? Because he wanted there to be a world that should be able to receive his divine energy. The only way or the way he chose to accomplish this is by removing the divine energy and allowing a light that is ultimately measured in accordance with the receivers to become manifest. So what's the purpose of the removal, the total removal? For the ultimate revelation. So therefore, it's not a real concealment, is not a real contraction. That's the point that I was making. The Rebbe elaborates. This will be understood according to which we explained earlier in chapter 3, in the parable of the teacher and the student. What type of teacher are we talking about? The Hine. When the teacher is very smart, very clever, completely beyond the level of the student. We're not talking about a regular teacher and student where there's a relative relationship between the two. The student is a student, the teacher is a teacher, but he's only the teacher because he's older and his mind is more developed. But it's not. There's no immeasurable gap between the two. In the Moshel of Rav and Talmud generally, in fact, in Chassidus, when it's brought this parable between a teacher and a student, it's usually talking about a teacher who is be'ein areich, completely beyond any relevant measure in terms of capacity and knowledge and ability to the student. So when the teacher is such a chacham, such a wise man that he's completely beyond the measure of the student's abilities, then in order for the teacher to be able to make manifest or to communicate a word of wisdom that the student should be able to receive, the teacher must first remove his idea completely. He has to retract the wisdom from his mind. He needs to totally remove himself from himself. And to retract the entire power of his wisdom. And it's only following that he can hang on. He can, and only after that is he able to to make present a word of wisdom. Limtze is defined. Lahamtzi means to present a word of wisdom that should be in relation to the receiver's capacity. What does that mean? If the receiver was relatively similar or at a lower level, but relative to the wise man, and the difference would only have been a difference between maturity and immaturity. In other words, the Chacham, the Rav's brain is more developed, and the Talmud is less developed. Then a contraction to retract his wisdom in a manner of reducing would be sufficient. He would be able to contract only part of his wisdom. He doesn't have to remove the entire wisdom. He would be able to leave What does he have to retract? He has to retract those things that the child or the Talmud cannot yet understand, and he can leave in his mind those ideas, that analysis that the student is able to receive. What does it mean in the Tzimtzum? In other words, what the Rebbe is addressing is, why did Hashem have to remove the entire Ur? Why didn't he just leave the Ur HaGvul and remove the Ur HaBlikvul? Why did he have to remove the Ur HaGvul as well? He had to remove everything. Right? So that's what he's addressing from the parable of the Rav and the Talmud. So if you're talking about a relative relationship, it's enough to remove only those things that would overwhelm the student, and to leave those things in his mind that he is able to receive. Because when the wisdom, which is relative to the teacher, and the wisdom that is relative to the student have a relative relationship one to another. In other words, it's not completely beyond it. The Rav's wisdom is not completely beyond the Talmud's. Then what do you need to do? All one needs to do is to reduce the part, to remove the part, or to reduce the part which is associated with the Rav. And you could leave what? The part which is associated to the student. This is not the case when the wisdom which is relative to the student and the wisdom that's relative to the teacher, the giver, the communicator, the bestower, are immeasurably distant one from another. Hainu, meaning it means to say, in other words, that the wisdom of the student, the receiver, is completely nullified within the wisdom which is relative to the teacher who communicates the idea, who bestows the idea. Then we cannot say that the teacher, it makes no sense, it doesn't apply that the teacher should reduce his wisdom and automatically just leave the intellectual ideas that are relative to the student. Because the wisdom, the seichel, the intellect, which is relative to the student, has no existence in relation to what? Insofar as the wisdom of the teacher is concerned. It's completely bottled. It's completely nullified. It's completely insignificant. As long as what? The teacher does not remove his wisdom and it's present there all the time. It's only when the teacher removes the wisdom that is relative to himself. He removes that completely. When does the wisdom of the student come into being? The ideas that are relative to the student's capacity, when do they come into existence? Only once the teacher removes his intellect completely. Whilst his intellect is there, it's so overwhelming and overbearing that the seichel, which is relative to the Talmud, doesn't exist. So in other words, this seems to strengthen the argument that if it's tzimtzum b'derech siluk, if it's total removal, it's concealment. So we go back to the original question: how is Havaya and Elikim kol echad? How is this removal, which is the Elikim aspect, chad, one with the Havaya, with the revelation? It's total removal. Says the Rebbe, Aval became nonetheless hasiba on top of Kuf Tzadik Beis shebiglolo nasis tzimtzum addition. The reason because of which the first contraction is made, and which is a contraction of loy b'derech miyut, not in the manner of reducing the light, ela b'derech siluk, but rather in a manner of removing it, right? As just explained in the parable of the Rav and the Talmud. Shebehesem lekach nasagam ofen siluk. In other words, the reason why the first contraction is in a manner of removal, which ultimately causes the light to be completely removed, this is in order to allow for the limited light, as it is before it travels through that barrier between beyond Atzilus and Atzilus, for it to be an independent existence. It should have some identifiable existence. Doesn't mean independent, everything is dependent on Hashem. It means it should be separate from, as it were, the Eira Blikvul. Before the Tzimtzum, before the first contraction, the Eira Gvul and the Eira Blikvul are all one. They're not discernible, right? What's the Eira Gvul in the parable? The Eira Gvul would be that part of the Seichel Arav, which is relative, which is associated, which is relative to the capacity of the Talmud, of the receiver. So before the Tzimtzum, it's non-existent, because the Eira Gvul and the Eira Blikvul exist as one. So the Eira Gvul is practically, it's there, but it's practically non-existent for all intents and purposes, insofar as the receiver is concerned. What does the Tzimtzum accomplish? It allows for the Eira Gvul to come into existence. Just like in the Moshel, in the parable, the removal, the total removal of the Rav's Seichel, retracing that into himself, allows now to come into being what? A Seichel, a wisdom that is relative to the Talmud's, to the student's capacity. This allows, once there is total removal, and it allows for the Eira Gvul, the limited divine energy, to come into existence, this then allows that there could be revelation to whom? To the receiver. From this, we can prove, this shows, this demonstrates, that Havaya is Elikim, that Havaya and Elikim, the giving force and the withholding force, are also one where, Bashamayim Amal, even in the levels beyond Atzilus, even in the levels that precede the realm of emanation. In the root of the lights, in the root and the root of the kelim, the receptacles. V'hainu, this means, Sha'af, although this means that even though it would seem that in the levels that are beyond Atzilus, beyond the realm of emanation, it would be the opposite. It wouldn't be that case. Havaya and Elikim would not be one. Why? Because the contraction is not in the manner of reducing the divine energy, but rather what? In a manner of total removal. Nonetheless, the mere fact that there is a change over here in the contraction relative to the other contractions, that it's in a manner of total removal, unlike all the other contractions which are in a manner of reduction. The fact that in order for there to be the creation of a light which is relative and measured in accordance with the capacity of the receiver, it was necessary to have a contraction which was completely different from all the contractions and say the shtalshalos in the chain order of creation. That what? All the others are in a manner of reduction. And this one had to be in a manner of total removal. This itself proves, far from proving the opposite, that Havaya and Elikim are not one, this proves that they are one. Why? It proves it proves that the giving force and the withholding force is one, not only at the level of Atzilus, at the realm of the world of emanation, even at the realm which is beyond Atzilus. So this is Havaya Hu Elikim, where Bashamayim Mimal, even beyond Atzilus. Now in the next section, the Rebbe is going to go to the next part of the pasuk, Al Ha'aretz, which, as he explained, is Biyah, and Al Ha'aretz Mitachas, they explained, is even Klippa. More about that in Mitzvah Shem on Thursday morning.
Very good. Theory Maimah.
The Rebbe then ties it into Avodas Hashem.